Find out what's on TJC. Sign up for our bi-weekly email program guide at tjctv.com.
Welcome to the Salon. Coming up, does legalizing same-sex marriage inhibit religious freedom? Deconstructing the Anthony Weiner Twitter debacle, the Orthodox Jewish woman who flaunts her religious observance on the basketball court, and is Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg right about women and ambition? It's all coming up on the Salon.
Hello, I'm Jane Eisner, editor of The Forward and Forward.com. Welcome to the Salon.
And I'm Rachel Sklar from Mediaite.com.
We have another great group of women here today, Rabbi Julie Schonfeld. She is the Executive Vice President of the Conservative Movement's Rabbinical Assembly and was recently named Jewish Women International's 2011 Women to Watch. Julie is also a member of President Obama's Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Welcome, Julie. And Ilene Beckerman. She is the author and illustrator of 5 books, including Love, Loss, and What I Wore, and her newest book, The Smartest Woman I Know, which is due out in September. And Michelle Goldberg. She is a senior contributing writer at the Daily Beast Newsweek and the author of Kingdom Coming and The Means of Reproduction. Welcome, ladies.
Well, Jane, before we start, I think it's important to say Mazel Tov because you've had 2 big events in the past little while, not only professionally, the Forward just went to a daily site, but also personally, your daughter got married, so much naches, so Mazel Tov.
Thank you, thank you. I'm still getting used to being a mother-in-law.
And I'm sure your son-in-law is too.
Yes. Well, we certainly have a lot to talk about today. We've got to start with Anthony Weiner, the crazy twittering bare-breasted congressman. Michelle, was he right to resign?
I think that it was somewhat unfortunate that we've gotten to a point where he had to resign. On the scale of congressional misdeeds, this strikes me as, maybe high on the creepy scale, but pretty low on the public interest scale. And it also sets, I think, a dangerous precedent. In the past, sex scandals have usually been justified with reference to some kind of larger issue. With Bill Clinton, it was ostensibly not about his dalliance with Monica Lewinsky, it was about perjury. With Elliot Spitzer, it was about the fact that he broke the law. There's always been a larger issue. There is
ostensibly to hang it on.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was really about the sex, but we all kind of pretended it wasn't, and that we didn't really care what people did in their personal lives. It was, there was larger public import, and that's why we needed to have these
But with Weiner, it was also about the bold-faced lying to across the board to journalists, to concocting the story, and the fact, frankly, that he took Twitter followings by young women who admired his political leadership,
right,
and turned that into a means of essentially coming onto them and
right
in the virtual space.
Well,
and that's what's troubling.
Right. The thing about the lying, though, is that, I think, as soon as you say that people who lie about an affair, that then it becomes about the lying, everybody who cheats on their wife is lying is kind of part of that. And it was, I think he panicked, he lied, he came clean relatively quickly in the scale of these things. So, if lying about virtual unfaithfulness to your wife then becomes a reason for people to step down, what about when if you say ask a candidate, how much pornography do you use? What do you subscribe to any pornographic websites? They lie, you catch them.
Does that then become pornography, or do you create it and then tweet it out?
No, I don't want to. Right.
But isn't there a question about judgment, though?
Right. Mm-hmm. Once we see this person who is out of control, right, who clearly has issues with impulse control and judgment, who has a lot of responsibility, who holds a significant public office, albeit one in which his constituents were by and large very satisfied with the work that he was doing, we have someone who is no longer at this particular moment in time fit to lead in the same way. That doesn't mean forever. right? Jewish tradition clearly takes a position that there's such a thing as tshuva, that we can reconsider our behavior. He obviously needs some help, medical help, psychological help, and can then possibly return to making these contributions. But perception is also part of reality. So part of what the public needs is a sense of someone of sagacity, of leadership, of judgment, and where that has been tainted or is presently distracted from, he needs to take a break.
But if we go back in time and we look at other politicians, if everybody had to resign who was dilly-dallying, I mean, if you go back to Kennedy, if you, and probably every president, maybe not Jimmy Carter, I don't know, maybe not Nixon, I don't know.
It's hard.
But you know, it was kept quiet then. And
But the rules of engagement have changed. I mean, they just have, and he made that change. I mean, it's not like he got caught twittering. He was tweeting.
wanton and reckless. Like that was
so,
what was really striking about it all.
Yeah. But what is, do you think that this is something that is true only of men? I mean, I'm fascinated by this question because
We're looking at our shoes.
all the sex
Just me?
scandals
Oh, no.
of powerful people in office, and there have been plenty of them.
Women. I mean, it's two parts to it.
But do you think as women ascend, hopefully, to positions of power in a much slower process than I think any of us feel comfortable with, but still it's happening, do you think that women will succumb to the same kind of ego-driven lack of kind of humility
and
that
impulse
we've seen,
control
and impulse?
I had read something last week, I don't know who said it. It said, men assume office because they want to be something, and women because they want to do something.
You know, and on the one hand, I think it's, you know, the last thing I want to do is pretend that women are, you know, have some kind of, that their motives are always more pure and more moral. But I do think just the kind of economies of sexuality, a woman who becomes powerful does not therefore have access to more sexual partners. I mean, probably, you know, it just doesn't, as a woman, if you want to sleep with a lot of people, you don't have to accomplish a lot in order to do that. So getting into you know, that's not kind of one of the rewards of success for women, access to lots of sexual partners. Which I think makes a big difference. You know, you're not going to see someone, a kind of maybe somewhat awkward, geeky, unattractive woman who at one point had been kind of shut out of the sexual marketplace, has a lot of really successful appearances on MSNBC, and then all of a sudden has tons of people, you know, willing to be her paramours.
But I also just though wonder whether it's about ego and how to kind of deal with power, or the sense that power doesn't need to be checked. I mean,
I think it might have to do with entitlement. You know, I think as women rise, I think we can all agree that there's much of a lesser sense of entitlement. It's a harder slog. You know, there are more roadblocks. You're more keenly aware of what you're fighting for in order to get to that position. And so they value it more. They fear the loss more. They're conscious of the fact that it could be lost more. And that, you know, this isn't just me theorizing in dime store psychology. I mean, this is sort of like has been part of the critical writings on this matter, because, you know, why not write critically on a twit pic of
I don't think it has to do with ego. I think it has to do with testosterone.
I mean, the counterexample to this, right, is Ayn Rand, who was the one very rare woman who did create this empire and used it to, you know, kind of prey sexually on her underlings. But part of the reason that that's so notable is because it's so incredibly rare.
Well, there's another part. The conversation began with the question of, you know, this misconduct marginalized him from his political access. And of course, women, even who don't commit misconduct, are often marginalized from their political access for any number of other things as well, as you were pointing out, Rachel, right? The different ways in which power is viewed in women versus how it's viewed in men, and more challenges that women have in sort of keeping the focus of the public on the issues that are at hand.
While we're talking about access to, you know, political power and just political access generally, it does make me think of another very significant event that just occurred, which is the passage of the gay marriage bill. So that's a completely
in New York State.
Yeah, that's a completely other element of political access for another marginalized group. And so I'm wondering, just speaking to that point, Julie, if you think that the claims from religious organizations trying to tamp down on that the passage of the gay marriage bill would impinge on religious freedom. Like if you think that's a valid argument, or how you think that plays into it.
Well, I speak from a certain perspective. My own denomination, the conservative movement, approved and celebrated the ability of rabbis to do commitment ceremonies for single-sex relationships several years ago. So I think that we really acknowledge the ability to create a Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael, a house of love and Jewish values among people of the same sex. So I think that while there were some, I think you're talking to, religious exemptions, if people in their own community, right, want to form around their own values, that can coexist with the clear larger mandate of the society that in a world of ever-increasing cynicism and loneliness, right, that there is more acknowledgement of ways to create permanent loving homes.
So it's interesting that you brought up exemptions, because evidently, from what we understand, putting in certain protections for religious institutions that do not want to sanction gay marriage was key to getting the bill passed in New York State, and it seems that it's been that way in a few other states as well. Do you feel like these things are necessary? The exemptions?
I think they're necessary to get these kind of bills passed. They're not necessary to preserve religious freedom, because no church or synagogue or religious institution of any kind has ever been forced to marry anybody. I couldn't get married in an Orthodox synagogue. My marriage to my husband probably isn't considered valid by them. And there's the idea that gay marriage or gay adoption threatens these things I think has always been a tremendous red herring. It threatens religious freedom only if you consider your religious freedom to be kind of contingent on having your religious ideas reified in the public sphere, which is to me kind of an especially preposterous position for rabbis to take. It's one thing, the evangelicals have always believed that they're kind of the legitimate heirs to the founding fathers, that American politics should reflect their religious ideology. And so even though I think that that's wrong and dangerous, it's at least consistent. Jews certainly don't believe that American law should reflect their religious law. In fact, they depend on they depend on separation of church and state.
But I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can understand the concerns that some people would have had those exemptions not been in there. It's not about an individual rabbi or a cantor and who that person could marry, but I can imagine like a catering hall or an institution that said, no, actually we're not going to rent out our hall for a same-sex marriage, could have been sued perhaps, right, or in some fashion really challenged legally, because now by saying gay marriage is legal, we are saying in New York State and now in several other states that right must be available to everyone.
Well, how astonishing though that a small minority of Jews who do not sanction same-sex marriage, because most Reform rabbis and as far as I know, the majority of
the conservative movement doesn't. You don't condone marriage. You condone commitment ceremonies.
Well, you're now getting into sort of an administrative point, right? Because from our point of view, we only perform civil marriages to the extent that we perform religious ceremonies. So what needs to be determined, and I imagine it would be affirmed, is that in a place where a commitment ceremony, which while it is not a Jewish marriage, it is this is a very technical distinction, right? But it is a Jewish sanctification ceremony of a permanent monogamous relationship, right? So that then could give the rabbi the appropriate ability to serve in a secular capacity there as well. But it's really a technical matter.
I'm sorry, Michelle, we interrupted you.
So in that sense, a prohibition on gay marriage also violated many people's religious freedoms, because many people's religions sanctify these marriages. So the idea that the freedom of not just gays and lesbians, but the freedom of many religious denominations should all be subsumed to some very hypothetical case about a religious catering company, or because none of these things are actually going to affect clergy, and none of them are going to affect synagogues. The only thing that they might conceivably affect are some of these kind of tangential institutions of wedding throwing. And so if you want
to implicate legal cases and discrimination cases and like a whole world of litigation could conceivably open up. Like I understand why, like you said, like in order just to get it passed, just to like progress doesn't happen in giant chunks. It happens incrementally, and then like a couple big chunks that you have to catch up.
This was a pretty big chunk. This was New York State.
This was a pretty big chunk, but there needed to be concessions in order to get there, and I'd rather obviously see some of those concessions to get there. I mean, I think that things do catch up over time. I think we'll see that. For a few years, there will be catering companies who will say, not in my catering hall, and then, market forces will prevail, and they'll be like, maybe in my catering hall.
It'll be like healthcare. But was it hard to pass that within the conservative movement? Was there much argument?
There was discussion over several years, and it was a very complicated matter in which you're dealing with the sort of technicalities of an ancient tradition, right? A consistent ancient tradition, related actually to the current discussion, right? That in any legal system, you have the tensile strength that comes from the balance, right, of trying to hear different voices. In the final analysis in December of 2006, the conservative movement approved commitment ceremonies. Again, really just a very technical matter. They are, creating, permanent, loving, caring Jewish relationships in that
Did you
context.
lose any members? Did anybody start a new group? Because
that's a very interesting question, and it's a fascinating question about Jewish society overall. What is our tensile strength to hear different voices? And while there was concern that this would create some kind of a schism, it did not create a schism. And actually, it created a lot of additional religious creativity and interest, as such changes do. But they're never done perfectly and to everybody's satisfaction.
I don't have a problem with, I think that I don't really have a problem with these exceptions as much as I think that they are superfluous, because I think that they are responding to a non-existent threat.
I am also just much more focused on the sense of excitement about living in an open society in which these changes can take place.
And all the fabulous weddings that now are going to be taking place. Come on. I'm looking forward to that.
And even, right, thinking about your concerns about the exceptions, I want to also take into account that it's part of that dynamic that has made it possible for Jewish society and Jewish community to thrive so freely in the United States. And that even while in sort of the technical ad locum detail, I hear your concerns, I'm appreciative of the fact that we were able to get to this place in a way that everybody could be moderately dissatisfied and overall very, very celebratory.
I'm definitely not moderately dissatisfied. I think that I'm mostly ecstatic and think that this is a minor quibble. I think that this is, I wrote recently that, they say that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. You rarely get to see it bend so abruptly and so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that this was just,
and it was also,
inspiring.
I think, a fascinating story of political leadership.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
really
and
was.
that was inspiring too. So now, if we can segue from that incredible celebration to maybe something a little bit more mundane, but still fascinating. Many of you maybe are aware of this incredible basketball star, Naama Shafir, at University of Toledo. She's an Orthodox woman, very serious about how she plays, but also how she conducts herself. And there she is. She's part of the Israeli national team playing in a recent European tournament. And there was a big question about what she should wear.
Whether or not her arms could be covered.
Right, because for her, modesty was about covering her arms. The Europeans, don't like much diversity in dress, as we've sometimes seen. And there was a lot of back and forth. The compromise was that she got to cover her arms, but in a flesh-colored kind of shirt. So I guess it might not have been so noticeable.
I love that compromise.
You really?
Yeah, I think if the sort of the reason for the policy is that teams need to be able to distinguish easily between themselves and the opposite members on the court when things are moving fast, then I think that's a good compromise. I think that, should they have maybe let her wear a T-shirt in the same colors? Probably. But as far as compromises go, that's rather ingenious.
Do you think it's important, Ilene, about what she actually wears?
She was wearing a uniform. I mean, I wonder if somebody offered to, if they put logos on her T-shirt or something, if they would be more inclined to let her wear that. I just tell you a story about silly. To me, it's silly. For the past couple of years, I've worn what we would call a shmata on my head. And I wore that because I didn't want to do my hair and I didn't know what to do with my eyebrows, and I wore it dramatically low. It was amazing to me because Muslims thought I was a Muslim, Hasidic Jews thought I was a Hasidic Jew, women who had chemo thought I was a sister. I mean, this is a piece of fabric, and it made me, in a way, it made me feel very good until I thought, you know what, I really look at my age, I look a little bit too silly. I look like late gypsy, early bag lady, so I gave it up. But it was a piece of cloth.
Right. Well, back in the things to celebrate, right, the fact that there was an Orthodox Jewish woman who is an incredibly successful athlete out there fighting for this ability to do this at this level is fantastic.
We published a story about her a couple of months ago, and one of the things that we learned was that when she had actually won this big award, the ceremony was on Shabbat, and so she just walked home several miles afterwards because she wasn't going to miss the ceremony and she wasn't going to drive on Shabbat. I thought that was also kind of an ingenious compromise.
It also speaks in terms of the world of professional sports. We look sometimes at people who are traditionally religious and their garb seems peculiar or their habits seem different. And to remember that there are a lot of parts of the society in which there are certain norms and decorum that are part of how the game is played and part of what makes everybody comfortable. And it's sort of not unrelated to the gay marriage question, which is how can you make different communities comfortable with each other when they have different rules of engagement of how the game is played?
But I do think the Europeans have a harder time with overt displays of religious garb. I mean, we've seen that in the headscarves controversy in France, and I think because European nations tend to be more religiously homogenous, at least until the last few decades, there doesn't seem to be that kind of open acceptance.
Would they have made Weena resign? I mean, they're more open to sexuality. I mean, by us, it's like, make war, not love.
Although it's funny, I mean, this is maybe a tangent, but one thing that we've seen I was one of those people for a long time who celebrated the more sophisticated European approach to these things, although I think the French response to the DSK case shows us that this is not so much a kind of sophisticated understanding of sexual realism, it's just a kind of blatant defense of men's sexual entitlement
and
often.
Power.
Yeah.
So as long as we're talking about power, I actually want to bring up something that is actually very important to me. Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, the CEO of Facebook, is really one of my idols. She's awesome, and she's been speaking out very loudly lately about the challenges women have in rising. This brings us back to what we were talking about at the beginning, and and in a recent address to Barnard University, at their commencement,
Barnard College,
sorry. She talked about how women, they'll never close the achievement gap until we close the ambition gap. And women need to, put their hand up because men have their hand up all the time.
In our country, in the college-educated part of the population, men are more ambitious than women. They're more ambitious the day they graduate from college. They remain more ambitious every step along the career path. And I hope that you, yes you, each and every one of you have the ambition to run the world, because this world needs you to run it. Women all around the world are counting on you. I'm counting on you.
So, I'm just going to throw all this out there in light of everything we've been talking about, through this discussion.
Well, but in that speech, if I might just add, this was at their commencement. So she's addressing new college grads. And she also allowed, as to she felt that her generation, that is my generation, hadn't done enough, that we were leaning back more than leaning forward, leaning in. And I just wonder if any of you see that sort of generational change as well.
It's fascinating in that it does sort of cut both ways. So a woman can go to school, go to graduate school, and decide at some point in our careers that we want to have a better balance, right? And we want to live our lives differently. And there's great social approbation for that. There's really not so much opportunity, right, for men who go to graduate school to decide that they're not interested in using their graduate degree, you know, to the fullest extent. That then creates a dynamic and a culture in a lot of professional environments where it becomes a more thickly male culture and makes it harder for the women who stay engaged to kind of move ahead in that space.
Wait, but the flip side of that, I mean, that's kind of maybe the glass half full version of what's happening, and mine is the glass half empty, which is that there's very little social support out there for women who want to combine work and family. You know, I think that I agree with a lot of the points that she made, but I also think it's a mistake to see it as a matter of kind of personal failings or just personal choices. You know, there are a whole bunch of kind of social structures that fail to help women achieve their, you know, kind of multifarious goals. And so I don't think it's enough to just say, try harder, be more ambitious. You also have to fight for things like childcare, like,
I agree,
right?
10,000%, 10,000%. And all of these things really devolve more to the home in many ways than the workplace in the social sphere, because women are not only caring for family, they are also caring for the elderly and aging parents. And there's just a greater sense in some way still deep within our society that women's contributions are not as important and don't need to be supported in the same way. So I agree with you on that.
You know, and then the default falls to women as well.
I look at you guys sitting here now, and I think you are amazing women. You're married, you have children.
Some of us aren't, but that's okay. Comes up every episode.
I look at my daughters, and I have 3 daughters who had careers up until they became pregnant. And then they became helicopter moms. And I look at my own lifespan. I was just 76, and if someone had told me when I was younger that I would be doing something other than being a mother, I would have told them to stop smoking what they were smoking, because it didn't occur to me. But we do have a long life, and I think there's a time for everything. I don't think that women have to give up one thing. I mean, your children are young for such a short period of time. I wanted to be home with them. That was my choice. It might not be, you know, somebody else's.
I completely agree with you, because it's always been about choice. But I also have to say, as someone who worked through 3 pregnancies, took very short maternity leaves, and really, really worked hard to, you know, advance my career while caring for my family and maintaining what is still happily a good marriage. I think it's great for people, men or women, to step off the career ladder and do other things. But I think it does come with a cost, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I think that that's fair. Because I didn't take that time off. And I did, you know, work right through. And it's not just, oh, I did it. I learned a lot. I accomplished a lot. I made mistakes. I learned from my mistakes. I'm a better journalist because of it. I'm a better leader because of it.
As someone who's sort of coming up without those considerations just yet, you know, my concern is not in what choice people make. My concern is about what inhibits them in their rise, you know, as a result of it. You know, external forces. No, you know, there's no question that someone who works through will be at a higher level than someone who took time off. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot more that happens with respect to, you know, the invisible or you know, or subtle impediments to women that is not the result of their choices. It's a result of external factors. And so that's what I keep a watch for.
And I think in that sense, it's really fair to ask women leaders, what have you done with your power? How are you changing the workplace? I don't know what the deal is at Facebook, but I suspect that that they are family friendly, or at least they should be. And if they're not, she should be trying to do that. I mean, I know since I got to the Forward, we now have a paid maternity leave policy. It's not great, but at least it's something. We offer paid leave to, very short, but at least some leave to men whose partners, wives have children. We're trying to kind of walk the walk, but it's also up to us, those of us who are fortunate enough to have some kind of positions of leadership, to actually change the workplace too.
I also see a marked difference working with graduate students in the similarity now between the men and the women and their aspirations for having a life of greater balance. I think that those differences the gap is closing very much. And in the next generation, I think that there's going to be a much stronger desire among men to enjoy some of those benefits as well, and to have that kind of family structure as well.
That's what we were always hoping. I mean, years ago when I was first having my children, and I was the first mother in just so many of my jobs, I lost count. But we were hoping that the men would catch on and change things. I have to say, it's taken much longer than I expected.
Jane, she made another statement which I thought was very powerful. She said, one of the most important career decisions you will ever make is your choice of life partner. Mm-hmm. And as someone who, like you, worked through all my pregnancies, I have 2 young children at home, 5 and 8. I really fully appreciate what that means to live in a household, where my husband and I both appreciate the value of all of our contributions, mm-hmm. and where I think it kind of spills over to our children, mm-hmm. That they understand where are mommy and Abba when we're not at home. Mm-hmm. Right? And what is the other partner doing? Mm-hmm. But I think it's much more a kind of a larger social question that then spills over into the creation of workplaces where these kinds of opportunities are available, as Rachel points out.
Well, Rachel, it looks like we have come to the end of yet another good conversation, and a spirited one today.
I'm so glad that you closed it off, because I was just about to bring it back to Anthony Weiner. So.
Well, thank you so much to our guests, to Rabbi Julie Schonfeld, to Ilene Beckerman, and to Michelle Goldberg. I'm Jane Eisner, editor of The Forward and Forward.com. Come to our website every day now, and you can continue this conversation on our women's issue blog, The Sisterhood.
And I'm Rachel Sklar. Have a great summer.